the most spiritual concept of the last decade has quietly become the way millions of people are isolating themselves and calling it growth. I am going to say something tonight that is going to make a part of you defensive. Not because it is wrong, because for most of your life, setting boundaries has been the one piece of self-protection language you actually trusted. You learned it from a therapist, from a podcast, from the friend who finally said no to her mother. And it worked, at first. So tonight I want to ask you something, and I want you to feel the answer before you intellectualize it. What did boundaries become when everyone got them? When the word stopped being a tool of mature relational integrity and started being a permission slip for slow disappearance? Because here is what almost no spiritual teacher will say out loud, including most of the ones who have built entire courses around teaching you the language. In the last 10 years, the concept of boundaries has been so thoroughly commodified by wellness culture that it now functions, for a significant portion of the people using it, not as a relational practice, but as an unchallengeable veto, an exit clause, a way to leave the room of your own life without having to know why you are leaving. If you have ever ended a friendship by simply ceasing to respond and called it a boundary, if you have ever cut off a family member without ever attempting the conversation that might have been possible and called it self-care, if you have ever caught yourself protecting your peace with such precision that you ended up alone in a peace nobody else was invited into, this video is for you. And it is going to ask something of you that no spiritual content has dared to ask. In what follows, I am going to show you 3 things. First, what an actual boundary is in the original psychological and relational sense, and how the wellness industry quietly replaced that definition with something closer to a wall. Second, why the people using boundary language most aggressively are often the ones with the least ability to stay in difficult conversations, and why that pattern was inevitable given how the concept was taught. And third, what to do now. Not how to stop having boundaries, how to recover the original meaning of the word before it became a script. So let me ask you the question this hour will answer. What if the boundary you keep setting is not actually protecting you, but slowly removing you from the very life your soul came here to live? Let me tell you what a boundary actually is. Because the word has been used so loosely for so long that the original meaning has been buried under the wellness translation. And the original meaning is what your nervous system actually needed. In the original psychological sense, before the concept was extracted from clinical practice and merchandised by social media, a boundary was never a wall. A boundary was a living agreement, an ongoing communication about what you can give in a relationship and what you cannot, what you welcome and what depletes you, what is yours to carry and what was never yours to begin with. Notice the verbs: communication, welcome, carry. All of them require the relationship to remain open while the boundary is drawn. This is what almost nobody is teaching anymore. A real boundary requires presence. You have to remain in contact with the other person while you draw it. You have to tolerate their reaction. You have to allow the relationship to renegotiate itself in light of what you just named. You have to stay in the room. But what wellness culture taught millions of people in the last decade is something structurally different. It taught that boundaries are exits, that you do not owe explanations, that you do not owe conversation, that you do not owe the relationship the work of remaining in it while you renegotiate it. You can simply leave, block, unfollow, stop responding, and call any of those retroactively a boundary. So here is the central image I want you to hold for the rest of this hour. A boundary is a door, not a wall. The door opens to what nourishes you and closes to what depletes you. A wall opens to nothing and closes to everything, including the version of you that needed to grow. The first layer of why this distortion happened is what most teachers will tell you if pressed. Therapy language entered popular culture faster than therapy literacy did. People learned the words boundary, trauma, trigger, self-care, without ever learning the deeper relational frameworks those words came from. So the words became hollow tools, available to anyone, defensible by everyone, misused by most. The third layer, the one almost nobody says, is that boundaries became the most acceptable way to say I don't want to be challenged. But here is where this gets uncomfortable. If boundaries became the language of avoiding growth, then everyone in your life who has been setting boundaries with you may not have been protecting themselves from harm. They may have been protecting themselves from change. And so may you. You know which one. At some point in the last few years, the messages got slower, the plans got vaguer, and then, without ceremony, you stopped responding entirely. You may have framed it to yourself as protecting your peace, as releasing what no longer served, as recognizing the relationship had run its course. But here is the question almost nobody asks afterward. Did you ever tell her what was actually happening in you? Most people, when this is asked, realize the answer is no. You did not tell her. You did not give her the chance to meet what you were actually feeling. You decided that the conversation was beyond her capacity, or beyond your capacity, or that the friendship had already failed too thoroughly to deserve the labor of an ending. And maybe you were right. But maybe you used a wellness script to avoid the discomfort of being honest about something you had not yet examined in yourself. But wait, there is something most teachers miss about this transit through your relational history. They will tell you to honor your truth and release what is no longer aligned. No, what they will not tell you is that the family member you cut off, the parent you went no contact with, the sibling you stopped speaking to. Some of those decisions were necessary, and some of those decisions were the 10 years of growth you were not yet willing to do, disguised as a boundary. Here is the question almost nobody asks. When you cut off your mother, your father, your sibling, did you ever tell them what you actually needed from them? Not in a fight, not in a passive-aggressive text, not through a third party. Did you ever sit across from them, regulated, articulate, and say the sentence that would have given them a real chance to either rise to it or confirm their incapacity? If you did not, the cutoff was not a boundary. It was a verdict you delivered before the trial. Imagine a woman, 41 years old. She has spent the last 3 years in what she calls deep boundary work. She has cut off 2 close friends, distanced from her sister, blocked her father, and stopped attending family gatherings. But every Sunday evening, around 6 o'clock, she experiences something she cannot name. Something more like erosion. As if the carefully curated peace she built has been quietly removing pieces of her, one boundary at a time. What you call a boundary is sometimes a refusal to grow in the direction your soul actually came here to grow. But everything I just told you about the pattern is only half the story. Because the deeper problem with how boundaries have been taught is not just relational. It is ontological. Every boundary you draw assumes a self that is being protected by it. And almost nobody, including the therapist who introduced the language, has paused to ask the obvious question. Which self? Protected from what? At what cost to the version of you that has not yet emerged? The self you have been protecting with your boundaries, the one whose peace must not be disturbed, whose energy must not be drained, whose alignment must not be challenged, is a snapshot. A specific moment in your becoming, frozen as if it were the final form. But you are not a final form. You never have been. A self is not an object that needs walls. A self is a process that needs encounters. Every meaningful expansion of who you have ever been happened because something or someone showed up in your life that you could not control, did not choose, and could not protect yourself from. You did not become wiser through curated experiences. You became wiser through the conversations you almost did not survive. So here is the part wellness culture cannot say out loud, because saying it would collapse half its industry. A defended self is a stalled self. You can build a perimeter so secure that no one ever challenges you again, and within 5 years, the version of you inside the perimeter will be the same version of you who built it. No expansion, no contradiction, no discomfort, no growth. This is the part nobody warned you about. The peace you have been curating is not the peace your soul came here for. Soul peace is not the absence of disturbance. Soul peace is the capacity to remain present inside disturbance without losing yourself. And that capacity is built only by the experiences your boundaries have been keeping out. So this is where I want to give you the line that this video is going to be remembered for. Because the entire reframe of these years pivots on it. What you call a boundary is sometimes a refusal to grow in the direction your soul actually came here to grow. Now, there is a cost to seeing this clearly. When you start asking yourself, before drawing each boundary, am I protecting myself or refusing myself? So you have been holding for years will collapse on their own. Not all of them. The real ones will stay. The protective ones earned in actual harm will stay. But the ones that were really refusals will dissolve under the weight of the question. And here is the cost. When the refusals dissolve, you will be visible again to people you had decided to disappear from. Some of those people will reach for you, some will not. But you will have to live with the discomfort of being witnessed by the parts of your past you wrote off too quickly. But you have stayed with me this far, which means a part of you already knew, which means you are about to enter the part of this that explains why this all happened. By a tradition that named 2,000 years ago the exact illusion that has made the modern self so difficult to live with. In the south of India, around the 2nd century after Christ, there lived a philosopher whose name almost nobody outside of Buddhist studies knows in the West. His name was Nagarjuna. He founded a school of philosophy called Madhyamaka, the middle way, and what he taught was so precise, so structurally devastating to ordinary assumptions about identity that it took the Western philosophical tradition another 1800 years to catch up to him. What Nagarjuna taught, and what every serious lineage of Buddhism has carried forward for 2 millennia, is that the self you assume you are protecting with your boundaries does not exist in the way you think it does. Not in some mystical sense. In a precise, structural sense, the self that needs walls is not the self that is real. The first concept Nagarjuna inherited and refined is called pratitya samutpada. In English, the closest translation is dependent co-arising. But the literal Sanskrit means something like, this arises in dependence upon that, which arises in dependence upon something else. Nothing arises alone. Nothing exists by itself. Every entity, every event, every self is the meeting point of conditions that precede it and surround it. Apply this to yourself. You are the meeting point of every conversation you ever had, every meal you ever ate, every book you ever read, every relationship that shaped you, every climate you grew up in, every word you learned to think with. Take any of those away and you would be a different self. Which means the self you are right now is, structurally, the conversation between you and everything that has touched you. You are not the protected entity. You are the conversation. The second concept is harder. It is called sunyata, usually translated as emptiness, though the translation has been misunderstood for generations in the West as something nihilistic. It is not nihilistic. It is the most precise description of how things actually exist that any tradition has ever produced. What Nagarjuna meant by emptiness is this: nothing has its own independent existence. You are real. The chair you are sitting on is real. The relationship you ended last year was real. But none of those things exist as isolated, self-contained, independent entities. They exist only in relationship. They exist only as conversations between conditions. The separate self that the wellness industry told you to protect with walls is the one thing in the universe that has never actually existed. So here is the second line I want you to carry from this hour. Because if you understand it, you will never draw a boundary the same way again. The self that needs to be protected by walls is the same self that cannot be at peace inside them. Read that again. The self that needs to be protected by walls is the same self that cannot be at peace inside them. Because the very structure that makes you feel you need walls is the structure that prevents the peace walls were supposed to deliver. You cannot wall yourself into wholeness. Wholeness comes from the conversation, not from the silence around it. So before this block ends, I want to ask you to do something. Place one hand on your sternum and ask the part of you that has been drawing boundaries for years one question. Which of my walls were earned in actual harm? And which were built around the version of me that did not want to be challenged? Whatever rises, do not soften it. Do not edit it. Whatever the first answer is, that is the door. And in what comes next, I am going to show you what to do with what you just heard. If you placed your hand on your sternum at the end of the last block, then a sentence has already begun to rise. You may not have words for it yet, but it is in motion now. So here is the surface answer to the question that opened this hour. What did boundaries become when everyone got them? On the surface, they became the most overused word in modern relational language, applied to everything from a refusal to attend a wedding to the act of blocking a stranger online. All true. All also surface. The deeper answer is this. When everyone got the language of boundaries without the developmental work that lets boundaries function as living agreements, the language became a shield against being known. What you have been calling a boundary in many cases is not a tool of relational integrity. It is a way to make yourself unreachable while appearing to be in relationship. You can stay in the friend group while being emotionally absent. You can stay in the family while being inaccessible. You can stay married while being walled off. And the wellness industry has taught you to call all of those configurations healthy. They are not. They are sustainable forms of withdrawal. This is why so many people who are doing the work report feeling less alive than they did before they started. Less moved, less surprised, less in love, less awake to the unpredictable in their own lives. Because the same walls that kept harm out kept aliveness from getting in. You cannot have one without the other. No system has ever found a way. Now here is what almost no teacher will tell you. You were never meant to be defended. You were meant to be discerning. A defended self is closed. A discerning self is open with intelligence. The first locks every door at once. The second decides, encounter by encounter, what gets through and what does not. These are not the same skill. And the wellness industry conflated them because defending is teachable in a 40-minute course and discerning is the work of a decade. The voice that has been telling you your whole adult life that you must protect yourself from anything uncomfortable is not a wise voice. It is the voice of a culture that mistook anesthesia for healing. You came here to be moved. You came here to be known by people who have permission to challenge you. You came here to remain in difficult conversations long enough for them to become true ones. None of that requires walls. All of it requires the part of you that knows the difference between harm and discomfort. So here is the line. You were never meant to wall yourself into peace. You were meant to become the kind of self that does not need walls to remain itself. A boundary is a door, not a wall. The door opens to what nourishes you and closes to what depletes you. But the door cannot be a door if you cement it shut. And every wall you have ever built was a door you cemented before you finished learning what was on the other side. You did not come here to be safe. You did not come here to be unbothered. You did not come here to curate a peace that requires the absence of everyone who could change you. You came here to be in conversation with reality, when the version of you that is at peace inside that conversation is the version that does not need walls to find herself. Now I am going to show you what to do tomorrow morning and the morning after, because becoming the kind of self that does not need walls is not a moment, it is a practice. And without the practice, the walls will rebuild themselves before sundown. If you have stayed with me until this point, I want you to hear something before I give you the practice. What you just felt is rare. The fact that you stayed through everything that named what you have been doing under the language of self-protection, that is not common. That is the discerning self surfacing. If this channel has spoken to a part of you that nothing else has been able to reach, subscribe and walk this path with me. Not because I am asking, because the part of you that just refused another wall is. And let the next conversation find you without armor. Now, back to the work that matters. Because what comes next is the part most people skip. And it is the part that actually keeps the door from collapsing back into a wall. First, each morning before you check your phone, you will sit somewhere quiet for 60 seconds and ask one question. Where am I about to call something a boundary today that is actually a refusal? You will not write the answer. You will not act on it immediately. You will only listen. Because the part of you that has been mistaking refusal for protection has been doing it on autopilot. Within 10 days of asking this question daily, the autopilot starts to fail, which means the discrimination starts to become available. Second, you are going to keep a ledger, not a journal, a ledger. On a single page in a notebook, you will write every conversation you avoided in the last 7 days. One line each: date, person, what you avoided saying. No commentary. You will not act on the list. You will only see it. Because translator souls and avoidant souls share one thing in common. They forget what they did not say 5 minutes after not saying it. Within 30 days of keeping the ledger, a pattern will emerge. The same kind of conversation, the same kind of person, the same kind of room. And the pattern, once visible, is the unfinished work. Third, once a day for the next 40 days. Before you draw any boundary, large or small, you will pause for 10 seconds and ask the body one question. Is this boundary protecting me from harm or from change? You will not analyze the answer. You will not justify. You will only register what your body says. Because the body of someone who has spent years building walls knows the difference. One feels like grounded clarity. The other feels like quiet flinching. Trust the flinch. The flinch is the data. Fourth, in the next 90 days, at least once, you will have one conversation you have been avoiding for years. Not all of them, one. You will choose the conversation that the body's verdict has flagged most consistently as, this was never a boundary. You will not have it perfectly. You will not script it in advance. You will simply remain in the room with the other person, regulated and articulate, and you will say the sentence that the wall was built to avoid saying. What happens after will surprise you. Sometimes the relationship will deepen. Sometimes it will end on cleaner terms. But it will never again be the unfinished thing it was. Fifth, and this one is the most powerful, so I am giving it to you last. Once a month, for the next 12 months, you will write a single page to the version of yourself who, at any past moment, built a wall and called it self-care. You will write 3 sentences. Here is what I now see was actually happening. Here is what I would have said if I had stayed in the room. Here is who I am becoming because I am no longer hiding from that conversation. Fold the letter. Keep it. Do not show it. Because the practice is the conversation between the soul and the parts of itself it had decided to stop speaking to. Without intermediary. These 5 practices together are not self-improvement. They are the dismantling of the wall and the rebuilding of the door. Done daily across the next moon cycle, you will not recognize the version of yourself that arrives at the other side. But the people who stayed will, because the version that arrives is the one they always knew was underneath the wall. We have been together for some time now. The field around her is alive with possible conversations she is now able to hold. Something shifted in you in the time we spent together. You may not name it yet. You do not have to. The part of you that needed the naming, she was already named somewhere underneath, the moment you pressed play. All this conversation did was bring the recognition up to where you could feel it. You did not learn anything tonight. You remembered. You remembered the difference between protecting and refusing. You remembered the shape of a real boundary. You remembered that the self you were taught to defend was never the one that needed defending in the first place. And the part of you that has been waiting for permission to come out from behind the wall just received it. If this reached you, if any part of this conversation found a place inside you that nothing else has been able to find, there are 5 souls in your life right now who have been mistaking their own walls for self-care. Send this to them, not as critique, as permission. The right ones will recognize themselves in this, the way you did. And before you go, tell me below, what is the conversation you have been avoiding for the longest that you can finally see was never a boundary, but a door you cemented before you finished hearing what was on the other side? No shame, just naming. Because what we name in public, we no longer carry as private confusion. And which question do you want me to take next? Because I read every soul who shows up. There is one more thing the practice of the door reveals about you, though. Something I did not have time to name in this conversation. Because the wall you have spent years building was not arbitrary. It was built around a specific wound. And until you trace which wound, each version of the wall will keep rebuilding itself in a new disguise. The next time as a boundary. The time after that as a values misalignment. The time after that as a trust your gut. Same wall, different language. That is what I will show you next. Until the cosmos calls you back to me. Stay in alignment. Stay in awe.